Randy needs that house more than you do, and if you don't sign it over by Friday, we'll see you in court." My father's voice crackled through the speakerphone while my lawyer, Julia Morse, covered her mouth to muffle her laughter. The legal threat that was supposed to terrify me into submission had just become the key to my freedom and the beginning of their complete downfall. Hi, everyone. My name is Beverly. I'm 34 years old, and I discovered that sometimes the best way to win a war is to let your enemies fire the first shot. If you've ever felt powerless against a family who thinks they can walk all over you, smash that like button, because today justice gets served ice cold. Julia composed herself, straightening her navy blazer as she leaned toward the phone. "Mr. Harrison, this is Julia Morse, Beverly's attorney. I must advise you that this call is being recorded and your threat of litigation has been noted. On what legal grounds exactly do you plan to sue your daughter for her own property?" The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then my mother Gloria's voice came through, shrill and defensive. "She knows what she owes us. We raised her. I'm going to stop you right there," Julia interrupted, her voice smooth as silk over steel. "Raising a child is a legal obligation, not a debt to be collected. Please proceed with your lawsuit. I haven't had this much entertainment in years." The call ended with my father's sputtered curses. Julia turned to me, her expression shifting from amused to serious. "They're going to regret this, Beverly, but are you prepared for what comes next?" I looked around my living room. The exposed brick walls I'd restored myself, the original hardwood floors I'd salvaged, the bay windows overlooking the garden I'd cultivated from dirt and neglect. This 1920s craftsman hadn't just been a house when I bought it 5 years ago. It had been a wreck, a teardown, everyone said, except I saw potential. Just like I'd seen potential in myself, despite my family's best efforts to convince me otherwise. The house had cost me everything: my savings, my sleep, my social life. I'd spent weekends stripping wallpaper with bleeding fingertips, nights learning plumbing from YouTube until my eyes burned, holidays alone because family gatherings always turned into lectures about how I was wasting my life on a money pit while my brother Randy needed help. Always Randy, the golden child who dropped out of 3 colleges, wrecked 2 cars, and burned through every loan my parents gave him. The same brother who'd sneered at my fixer-upper until his realtor friend Charlotte mentioned the neighborhood was gentrifying and property values had tripled. That's when my house became family property. That's when I became selfish for living in it alone. "I've been preparing for this my whole life," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I just didn't know it." "Let's review what we have," Julia said, opening her laptop. "The deed is solely in your name, correct? Purchased with my own money, no co-signers, no family loans." I pulled out my phone, scrolling through 5 years of transformation photos. Everything documented, every receipt saved. I turned a $140,000 teardown into a $500,000 home with my own hands and money. Julia's eyes gleamed. "And your parents' contribution?" The memories hit like a physical blow. They told me I was an idiot. Mom said I'd die alone in my money pit. Dad offered to introduce me to a nice apartment complex instead. "Perfect," she typed rapidly. "Now, tell me about this trust fund situation you mentioned." This was where it got interesting, where my parents' greed had finally exposed their greatest secret. The sleepless nights I'd spent piecing together the truth came flooding back. The anxiety that had eaten at my stomach lining. The way my hands shook when I first understood the magnitude of their betrayal. My grandmother, Martha, my dad's mother, left trust funds for both Randy and me. Equal amounts. We were supposed to get access at 25. I pulled out a folder I'd been carrying for weeks, the papers worn from my anxious handling. I never got mine. They told me Grandma changed her mind before she died, that she was disappointed in my life choices and removed me from the will. The shame I'd carried for years felt fresh again. I remembered crying in my car after that conversation, believing I truly was the disappointment they painted me to be. But last month, Randy got drunk at his engagement party to his fiancée Grace, started bragging about how he'd burned through his trust fund already and needed my house to maintain his lifestyle for his new wife. When I asked what trust fund, he laughed and said, "The same one you got, stupid." "Oh, wait!" I mimicked his cruel laugh, the sound bitter in my throat. "Mom and Dad said you pissed yours away on that dump. Guess that's why you're so bitter." Julia stopped typing. "He said you got your trust fund." That's what made me start digging. I hired a private investigator, Juan Carlos. He pulled records, found my grandmother's real will. I handed her the documents with trembling hands. Randy and I each inherited $200,000. The funds were distributed 5 years ago when I turned 25, but I never saw a penny. The paper rustled in the silence. My parents had themselves listed as trustees. They had the power to distribute the funds, and they did, to themselves. They told me I was disinherited while they stole my money to fund Randy's lifestyle. Julia's earlier laughter was gone. Her face was stone. This is fraud. Criminal fraud. And now they're threatening to sue you for a house you bought with your own money while they stole your inheritance. That's not even the best part, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Juan found more. My parents have been claiming me as a dependent on their taxes for the past 5 years, while I was fully employed and supporting myself. They've been collecting credits and deductions using my information. Tax fraud on top of inheritance theft. Julia shook her head. They really thought you'd never find out? They thought I was the same scared kid who believed them when they said I was worthless. The same daughter who accepted crumbs and called it love. The truth was, I might have stayed that person if they hadn't gotten greedy. If they'd been satisfied with stealing my inheritance, I'd have never known. But threatening to sue me for my house on a my blood, sweat, and tears house had triggered something primal. So, Julia said, closing her laptop with a decisive click. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to let them file their frivolous lawsuit. In discovery, we'll request financial records that will expose everything. Then we'll countersue for the stolen trust fund, file criminal complaints for fraud, and report the tax situation to the IRS. What about Randy? He didn't know about the theft. Ignorance isn't innocence. He benefited from stolen money and participated in trying to take your house. He's an adult who makes choices. 3 days later, my parents made good on their threat. I was served at work in front of colleagues, because of course they wanted to humiliate me. My hands shook as I signed for the papers, feeling the curious stares of coworkers burning into my back. The lawsuit claimed I had promised the house to Randy, that I was holding family property hostage, and sought immediate transfer of the deed. That night, I sat in my kitchen, the kitchen I'd rented myself, where I'd cried over burned dinners while learning to cook alone and read every word. Each lie felt like a slap. They painted me as a vindictive daughter withholding rightful family assets, as someone who'd made promises I'd never made. Julia's response was swift and brutal. Our countersuit laid out everything: the stolen inheritance, the tax fraud, the attempt to steal property purchased with legitimate funds. We didn't just defend. We declared war. The family group chat exploded within hours. My phone buzzed incessantly. Aunt Martha. Beverly, how could you sue your own parents? Uncle Joe. This is disgusting. The family doesn't do this. Cousin Lucas. Always knew you were selfish. My chest tightened with each message. These people had watched me struggle, had seen my parents' treatment of me, and still they defended the lie. I typed one response. They stole $200,000 from me. The evidence is filed with the court. Public record. Look it up. Then I left the chat, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. The real showdown came at what would be our last family dinner, 2 weeks after the lawsuits were filed. My mother had summoned everyone to their house, the house I now realized my inheritance had probably helped pay for. The irony wasn't lost on me. I arrived with Julia and Juan, my investigator. The dining room was packed with relatives, all ready to stage an intervention. My parents sat at the head of the table like martyred saints, Gloria's eyes already red-rimmed with tears. Beverly's here, someone whispered, and the room fell silent. The hostility was palpable. I could feel it pressing against my skin. You came, my mother said, tears already starting. I knew you still had some family loyalty. I came to give you one chance, I said, not sitting down. My voice carried further than I expected in the hushed room. Drop the lawsuit, return my inheritance with interest, and amend your fraudulent tax returns. Do it within 48 hours, and I'll consider not pressing criminal charges. How dare you? My father started, his face flushing red. How dare I do that? I laughed, but it was sharp, bitter. Discover you stole my inheritance? Find out you've been committing tax fraud? Refuse to hand over my house to your deadbeat son? Randy stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. I'm not a deadbeat. I need that house. Why? I asked, my voice cutting through the tension. Because you burned through $200,000 plus whatever mom and dad stole from me? Because your fiancé thinks you're rich and you can't admit you're broke? Grace went pale. What? Randy, what is she talking about? Juan stepped forward, placing a thick folder on the table. Financial records, he said simply. Mr. and Mrs. Harrison received $200,000 from Martha Harrison's trust intended for Beverly. The money was dispersed over 5 years into various accounts, including several in Randy's name. The room erupted. Relatives grabbed for the papers, voices rising in shock and anger. But not at my parents, at me, you ungrateful. Family business should stay. How could you embarrass? Enough. I slammed my hand on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. You want to talk about family? The family doesn't steal. Family doesn't lie. The family doesn't threaten to sue for property they have no right to. My voice rose with each word, years of suppressed rage finally finding its voice. You all sat here ready to guilt me into giving up my house. But where were you when they stole my inheritance? Where were you when they told me I was disinherited and worthless? Silence. The only sound was Grace quietly crying. That's what I thought. I looked at my parents, really looked at them. My mother's tears had stopped, replaced by cold calculation. My father's righteous anger had morphed into naked fear. You have 48 hours. Drop the lawsuit, return the money, or face the consequences. We don't have it, my mother whispered. The money, it's gone. Then you better find it, Julia said, her voice like ice. Sell assets, take out loans, figure it out. Because the alternative is federal prison for tax fraud and state prison for inheritance theft. We left them there, surrounded by relatives who were slowly realizing they'd been defending criminals. Grace broke up with Randy that night. She sent me a message that made my chest tight with vindication. Thank you for exposing the truth. He told me his trust fund was in property investments. I almost married a fraud. My parents dropped their lawsuit within 24 hours. They hired their own lawyer who tried to negotiate, but Julia was a shark who smelled blood. We accepted a payment plan for the stolen inheritance plus interest, required them to file amended tax returns, and got a legal agreement that they would never contact me again. The IRS penalties alone nearly bankrupted them. They had to sell their house, the one partially paid for with my money. Randy moved back in with them, his engagement ruined, his reputation destroyed. The golden child, tarnished beyond repair, but the sweetest justice came 6 months later. I was sitting in my garden, the one they'd mocked, when a certified letter arrived. It was from my grandmother's estate lawyer, Caleb Morrison, who'd been tracking me down after seeing the lawsuit in public records. My grandmother had left me something else, something my parents couldn't touch. Her personal journals and a small separate account they'd never known about. In her journal, dated a month before she died, she'd written, I fear that my son and his wife will try to keep Beverly from her inheritance. They've always resented her independence, her strength. If you're reading this, dear one, know that I saw who you really were. The house you'll build with your own hands will be worth more than any money I could leave you. But take what's yours and build your life free from their shadow. She'd known. Somehow she'd known. The small account had grown over the years to nearly $50,000. I used it to pay off the last of my renovation loans and install the greenhouse I'd always dreamed of. My house stands now as more than just property. It's proof that sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you're meant to keep. That sometimes their rejection is just redirection toward something better. The relatives who sided with my parents faded away. Good riddance to bad blood. But others reached out. Cousins who'd been pushed away. Aunts who'd been labeled difficult for asking questions. I built new relationships on foundations of truth instead of obligation. Randy still sends occasional messages begging for help. I don't respond. My parents live in a small apartment now, their golden years tarnished by their own greed. They thought they could sue me into submission, thought the threat of legal action would make me crumble like I had as a child. Instead, their threat became my liberation. Julia was right to laugh. It was laughable. The idea that the people who'd stolen from me could use the law as a weapon. The law became my sword instead, cutting through years of lies to reveal the truth beneath. My name is Beverly Harrison, and I own my house free and clear, not just the deed, but every brick, every board, every flower in the garden. I built it with hands they called worthless, with money they said I didn't deserve, with dreams they tried to steal. And when they threatened to take it all away, I didn't just keep my house. I brought theirs down around them. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just living well, it's living honestly, with nothing left to hide and nothing left to fear. If this story resonated with you, Hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever had to stand up to a family who tried to steal from you? Justice might be slow, but it's always worth the wait.